Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending. Today's forum is all about the lake. Let me back up one. I am your host and moderator for this afternoon's program, and I would like to start off by having an invocation from Sean Klein, and then we're going to also have a Pledge of Allegiance by Mark Pantley, HOA President, and then we'll get started.
Greetings on behalf of the Community Church. It is great to have you here. I've been asked to offer an invocation for the meeting, so will you join me in prayer? Holy God, we come before you today in hopes to do your work. Fill us with your grace so that we might see your will. Hear this prayer as a way to guide us. May it please your supreme and divine goodness to give us all abundant grace, ever to know your most holy will, and to perfectly fulfill it. Amen.
We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. We're on the screen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge some visitors that we have that have attended. From the POA, we have Pat White in the audience. Lowell Russell is here, Tennessee State Representative for District 21. Thank you, Lowell, for coming. We also have Henry Cullen, Commissioner for the 7th District. Michael Bell, who was the state senator, retired, and he's here, and he'll be representing TWRA. And Paulette Summy is also here, 4th District County Commissioner. Thank you very much, Paulette, for coming. And we also have Michael Bell. Is it? Okay. So a few things that before we get started, if you do have your cell phone, if you could mute it or turn it off, whichever is more comfortable for you. All questions will be held until the end. So make little notes for yourself as the program goes on, and then we'll have questions at the end. To submit a question, you can come up to the mic in the center of the room, state your name and who the question is directed to, and then whoever the participant is can respond to your questions. If we do run out of time, all questions are important, so we will be taking them. My email address is reflected on the screen, and you can, if we do run out of time, or you think about a question later after the program's over, feel free to send me an email, and I'll get the questions to the appropriate person. Before we get started, I do want to remind you about the HOA Summer Fun coming up. It's a membership picnic. It is limited to 500 people, and we basically take over the yacht club, inside and out. So Betty Fortune, and her email is on there if you want to, if you have any kind of questions, but there's food, music, games. It's really a great time, so just put that on your calendar. Okay, today's agenda is all about the lake. We have T-Bart is going to talk about the safety. We have the fishing club represented, and Region 4 TWRA, we have a number of participants that are going to give us an update on the state of the fisheries. That'll be followed by health and welfare of the lake, representatives from water, and then the end of it, we'll have a question and answer. So without further ado, Jeff Roche, he is a T-BART captain, and he also serves on the board of directors of T-BART and Water, and he's a member of the Tellico Village Fishing Club. And he is going to talk to us about T-BART and boater safety.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. If you are a boater on Tellico Lake, T-BART was created with you in mind. This is an organization that has been in existence for a little bit over 20 years, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organization and some of the things that we do. There we go. So T-BART is an all-volunteer, nonprofit service organization with around 150 members. We respond to daylight requests for non-medical, non-emergency assistance on Tellico Lake. So when I say non-medical, non-emergency, if there's a fire on your boat, you don't call T-BART. You call 911 and they'll get the fire department out there. If there's a medical emergency, that's a different group. We do things like if you run out of gas. I'm sure nobody in this room has ever run out of gas while you're out on the lake, right? I won't ask for a show of hands. Or had a dead battery. There's another real common one. Or maybe you hit something and your lower unit on your outboard is broken. But anything that fits the realm of that, we are there to provide coverage for you 365 days a year. We have a captain and crew on duty available to come and assist you. How do you get a hold of us? This is an interesting one because what you do is you call 911. And some people get a little bit confused by that because they think, wait, I'm out of gas and I'm calling 911. In this case, it makes sense. We have a relationship with the 911 call centers. They expect these calls. They will route the call to us, and they'll provide us with your name, your cell phone number that you called in on. And I assume you all know when you call 911, they have your location from the cell coverage. So we get your latitude and longitude. So we know where you are before we call you back. So we'll call your boat, see how things are, let you know we're on the way, and we'll come out and then we will tow your boat to a safe location. T-BART has 3 boats on the lake. There's one at the Tellico Village Yacht Club, there's one at Rarity Bay, and there's one at Kahiti. So that's the base program. If you're having trouble on the lake, we can be there to help you. Now, there's a separate type of tow that we're involved with, and this is called a courtesy tow. This is very different from what I just described. Courtesy tow would be, an example would be your boat's not functioning. You've got to get it on a trailer and get it in to get some work done on it. So we will make arrangements with you to send a boat over, and we'll help you. We'll tow that boat over to one of the boat docks, is a good example, so you can get it on a trailer and take it to get some work done. This is very different in how you communicate with us depending upon which type of tow. 911 is not to be used for a courtesy tow. Those are more planned things. Go to the water website, and I'm going to refer to this quite a bit today, but you'll see it on the slide up here, www.t-bart.org. That is our website. Everything I'm going to tell you today, regardless of what the piece of the program is available on that website. So you go to the very first homepage and you'll see at the top, Courtesy Tow. Just click on that, it'll tell you how to get a hold of us. This is a photograph of a boat under tow. And the reason this is in this slide presentation is just to ask some courtesy of everybody else that's out there on the water. When you see a towboat towing a boat, it would be great if you could give us a wide berth. Okay, waves are not a good thing when you're towing a boat. So we'd sure be appreciative of anything you could do to give us as much room as possible. T-BART has a specialized unit we call our NSS, or our Night and Special Support Team. This is a group of advanced trained captains who specialize in assisting law enforcement, emergency response agencies when they request help. So examples could be there's a fire and they need to get somebody out there. We might assist in helping carry somebody, ferry them out towards the boat. There are search and rescue operations we've participated in. We've got special side imaging electronics on our boats that can help us with recovery missions as well. So when asked, we do get involved, and we're very proud of that piece of our organization. Another program we have, and this is a really cool program that I think you'll appreciate, that you really can't do this type of thing very many places, but it's called our T-BART Life Jacket Loaner Program. And you can see the various locations on the slide. In each of these 8 locations, we have put a unit, a storage unit, or sometimes they're in the restrooms at a boat ramp, but we have put a whole assortment of U.S. Coast Guard approved life jackets for you to borrow. And the classic example that I can give for you is this: is you've got grandchildren that come and visit you once a year. Okay, funny thing, they don't stay the same size very long, right? Year over year, they keep getting bigger. So you can go out and buy new life jackets if you'd like to, and by the time that you're done, you're going to have quite a lineup. This program allows you to go to any of these locations and borrow a life jacket, use it a week, use it for 2 weeks, use it for what you need for that situation. When you're done, wash it, buckle it back up, and return it to that same place that you got it. I will tell you, I moved here 5 years ago. You could never do a program like this where I moved from. So I'm just here to say, God bless Tellico Village and its residents and the people in this area, Rarity Bay. This is a great program that runs as effectively as I just described it, because people do take accountability and return those life jackets. Tellico Lake Orientation Seminars. So these are, if you've never been to one of these, and you're either, if you're new to the lake or you're an experienced boater that is just, if you're new to boating or if you're new to Tellico Lake, these are great seminars for you to attend. We'll have 3 or 4 of them a year. About 100 people will be attendants at each of these meetings. And what we'll basically do is we sell maps for $5, and those maps, the slides are using the maps we're handing out as reference points. We will take you mile by mile from one end of the lake to the end of the lake. We're looking at boating hazards, safety information, and all kinds of points of interest. Where do you go to get gas? Where do you go? Where are the restaurants? There's just a tremendous amount of information that will help jumpstart you as you're learning the lake, and hopefully teach you some things that are unique about this lake. We have, our next session is May 13th at Kahiti. That is completely booked at this point, so you can't register for that. But the one after that is July 22nd at the Tellico Village Yacht Club, and we still got a lot of availability for that one. So please come and join us. It's a great atmosphere. You can ask questions, very casual atmosphere, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. Oh, I'm going to go back a second. I didn't mention that registration is required, but there's an address, tbartlakeorientation@gmail.com, that you'll need to use. Okay, funding sources. I've put a number of funding sources up here. People often ask how we get funded. Donations from people who we've towed, donations from boaters who haven't maybe been towed but support our mission. We have people who sometimes donate their boats. They're at the conclusion of their boating careers. They want to do something nice on the back end, and we have boats that get donated. We take the boat, sell it, we keep the proceeds, and then give them tax documentation on how so they can take a tax deduction. We also have a corporate sponsor. Yamaha, which has a big facility on the lake, is our corporate engine sponsor, which is a big deal, and we appreciate what they're doing on behalf of T-BART. Then finally, we have our annual Brat Fest. If you've not been to Brat Fest before, you're missing out. All you can eat beer, brats, potato salad, baked beans for $15. Our next Brat Fest is this coming Monday. It is also sold out, so there are no more tickets available. But in future, this is a fun event that I think you'll enjoy. And again, at $15, I think you can't beat that. If you're interested in joining T-BART, after what you've seen today or what you know, please come talk to us. We've got a membership table set up in the lobby of the meeting here. We'd love to talk to you after the meeting. If you're seeing this on Telco Village Network, again, go to our website. There's a membership tab. All you have to do, it's right on the first page. Just click that and we'll give you all the information you need to be able to get in contact with us. We assign you a mentor. We've got classroom training. We've got on the water training. And it's a great way to learn how to be part of T-BART. So I'm just going to wrap up by asking for a little help. The best way to keep this lake safe is for everyone to take the proper responsibility as boaters. Keep your boat well maintained, learn and follow all navigation rules. If you need some extra classes, the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary has an outstanding course here that they teach at Telco. I highly recommend it. And learn the lake. The more you're out on the lake, the more you're going to learn. So with that said, safe boating, and I will see you on the lake.
Thanks, Jeff. And they do have information out in the narthex too, so when we're done here, pick up a pamphlet and talk to some of the T-BART folks. Jim, would you like to tell us about the fishing club?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Goyert. I am the current president of the Telco Village Fishing Club. I'm joined also with one of our past presidents, Pete Young, who was manning the table when we first came in. We want to thank the HOA for the invitation to speak at the State of the Lake, and thank you for attending this afternoon. I actually saw one of my old neighbors that I haven't seen for probably, what, Jim? 8 years? 5 years? It's been quite a while. So we get to renew some acquaintances while we're here as well. We have a website, like every organization and club in the village, telcovillagefishinggroup.com. So if you want to take a closer look at us, you can go to the website. We also have an email address if you'd like to communicate with us. The club was established back in 2008 by a long-time village resident, Easy Ed Ziobro. At that time, there was maybe a double handful of members. The club has now grown to approximately 200 members. You do not need a boat to join the club. You do, however, have to be a resident of either Telco Village, Wind River, or Rarity Bay, since we have common waters and waterfronts and what have you. Obviously, the majority of our membership is right here in Telco Village. Our objectives are pretty simple. It's fun, it's fellowship, getting to know one another, and education. And by education, we mean learning the lake. And contrary to popular opinion by some people, there are fish in the lake, and yes, you can catch them. Although I might get some pushback, just saying. We fish for a variety of fish, not just bass. So we're not a bass club. We're not the bass masters that you'll see on TV or on ESPN or something like that. As you can see on this chart, freshwater fish of Tennessee, just about everything you see on this chart, you can catch in this lake, with a couple of exceptions. Most everything we do in our club during the course of the year, we do on Wednesdays. It's easy to remember. If it's Wednesday, the fishing club is doing something. For instance, on the second Wednesday of every month, whoops, how do we go backwards? There we go. On the second Wednesday of the month, we have our monthly fishing club meeting. Usually they are on the top floor of the yacht club. They start at 7, go to about 8:30, and they usually adjourn by 8:30 because everybody's getting restless, and so we know when it's time, and people just get up and walk out, but that's okay too. So what do? We have guest speakers that will come in. Some will be fishing guides from the area. Some will be academics about fishing. We also do workshops where this is the education part, where our more proficient anglers in the club will talk about techniques as far as the equipment that they use, when they use it, where they use it, how they use it, and what they are. And this is probably the single most popular thing that our members like. It's the hands-on, how do you fish? And a lot of it is obviously geared to the new members, which we turn over about 30 to 50 new members a year. On the second Wednesdays of the month, we have tournaments. They're not a competitive tournament. We fish for inches, not pounds. It's what we call a paper and pencil tournament. You catch them and you measure them. And at the end of the year, you get a trophy if you got the most inches in bragging rights, right? So it's pretty low key. And again, our whole emphasis is having fun fishing. The next Wednesday, we have outings where we fish the other area lakes, portions of this lake, and then we'll go down to Chickamauga, and we'll go to other areas up to Razor's Landing if you're familiar with that area. So we fish around, and we always end up having a lunch somewhere. Fishing we're sort of good at, lunch we are great at. And we get a lot of people that just show up for the lunch part, and that's okay too. We do 3 social events during the course of the year. We do what we call a social swap meet, and that's where everybody brings the gear that they want to sell, and they buy everybody else's gear that they want to sell. So we're just kind of trading garbage between each other, and we take it back home, put it in our garages till next year. We also serve them foot-long hot dogs, and this is where the husbands don't have to tell their wives what they had for dinner, so they'll kind of gorge out a little bit and what have you. So that will be coming up for us this month. Later in the year, we have a catered family picnic. We've been using Buddy's Barbecue lately and have had very good success. We have it at the Tokwa Pavilion, rain or shine. It's very well attended. Our memberships, by the way, are family memberships. It's not just the guy, if you will. So everybody comes. And then at the end of the year, we have a awards pizza meeting. Pizzas, soft drinks, and then we pass out trophies and have a lot of laughs based on the number of inches that guys caught. The biggest largemouth, the biggest smallmouth, if you will, kind of a thing. A couple of gag gifts, door prizes. We also do those at our club meetings. So again, the whole emphasis on what we do in our club, as I said before, is having fun fishing. Like T-BART, we do lake orientations as well, although ours is a little bit different. Where T-BART, you do yours in a meeting setting. We do ours on the lake with new members. So we take them out on pontoon boats, as you can see here in the picture, and we'll take them out into the creeks. We'll take them out on the main channel. And basically what we are doing is showing them where we fish, where we've caught fish, no guarantee, none whatsoever, no money back, and what equipment that we use. So it's kind of a hands-on on the lake, if you will. And generally it runs about an hour and a half to 2 hours on each run. We're active in the community. We're active in preserving the reservoir and the waters. We participate in Water's annual Lakeshore Cleanup Campaign. And if you haven't been to it, if you've never done it, it's quite an eye-opener, as you can see from the pictures. This was all stuff that was taken out of the water over the last several years. And I guess the good news here, and Water would probably touch on it, is that over the ensuing years, each year you're collecting a little bit less than you did the year before. So it does make a difference. In some of these places, you can see the garbage. It is, it's pretty gross. So we actively support that. It's good work by Water. We work to protect our fisheries. As I said before, our tournaments are paper and pencil. We don't take them, put them in our boat, take them to a weigh station or to a weigh-in somewhere. We measure them. Hopefully we catch them, we measure them, and we release them right on the spot. So where they came out of the water, they're going back into the water. Other amenities that we include in our club is members provide fishing reports. We have a rideshare program, so if you don't have a boat, we'll pair you up with somebody that does have a boat and take you out on the lake and take you fishing. We have a resource library with 30-plus presentations of the what, where, when, how to fish the local lakes, and a lot of that's been gathered from speakers and presentations that have been put together. Whoops, excuse me. We provide area fishing maps and photos, again, of where we have fished. We have speaker presentations that we have had at our club meetings. We also provide references or a reference source for area guides, boat repair services, and local area tackle retailers. And again, a lot of that is geared for new members. Appreciate the time. It's been short, but good. If you're interested, you can go to our website, or you can contact our treasurer. And family dues, $25 a year. We'll look forward to any questions that you might have when the presentations are complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So now we get to the point that we are going to talk about the state of the fisheries. And Michael, I believe you're going to introduce the folks that we have represented.
Thank you, appreciate it. Well, good afternoon. My name is Mike Bell, and as has been mentioned earlier, I'm just a recently retired state legislator, served in the Senate. In fact, I represented the Monroe side of Rarity Bay and Kahiti. I had Monroe County, and so I'm very familiar with Tellico Village and the communities up here and what y'all mean to Loudoun and Monroe County. I can tell you as a legislator, I really appreciate how involved you always were, and I can tell you Representative Russell, who's sitting up here at the front, he does a great job serving you in Nashville and appreciates your involvement as well. Most legislators, it's a part-time job, have a second job, and over the last 30 years, up until just recently, about a year and a half ago, I had a pressure washing and window cleaning business, and I had about 40 customers here in Tellico Village. So either the home that you live in, or the person who had it before you, I may have washed that house at one time or another. But I've spent a lot of time up here. But we're excited to be here today, and we appreciate you having us here to offer some comments on the state of the fisheries. And before I turn it over to our two experts who are here, I do want to recognize we have two of our officers here, Mr. Andy Collins, Lieutenant Andy Collins, who's here, and also Sergeant Anthony Chitwood, who are sitting up here in the front. These guys are law enforcement agents. A lot of people don't realize it, just full arrest powers and police powers that your sheriff or your city officers have, our guys have them as well. And I know they do a great job, not only with wildlife, but helping out in other areas when it's needed as well. But today we have Mr. Cole Hardy here. Cole's going to come up and present first. He's from a little town in Iowa, and he's spent much of his youth there hunting and fishing. He's got a BS in animal ecology from Iowa State, and he got an MS in biology from Tennessee Tech, studying catfish. And ended up coming ended up going first to Florida before coming back to Tennessee in 2019, where he serves as our Aquatic Nuisance Species Coordinator. He's going to come up first and talk a little bit about, I know, a hot topic that everybody's interested in, Asian carp. And then after him, Mr. John Hammonds is going to come up here and give a more general presentation on the state of the fisheries in Tellico Lake. And he started his career with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and has worked for TWA since 2004. And he lives in Newport and is responsible for the management of all the fishery resources and all the reservoirs in East Tennessee, which encompasses Region 4, which is kind of here northward. Here southward is in another region, but here northward are the reservoirs under his charge. So Cole, I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Mike. So, like Mike said, I'm just gonna get into this right away, and you know, we're on the clock here, so I'm gonna go over a few things. What are invasive carp for folks who might not know? Where are the invasive carp right now? What is TWA doing? So I'll touch on some of our active projects and things that we have going, and then just a little bit about our prevention and control strategy. So just to start out, invasive carp refers to 4 species: silver carp, bighead carp, grass carp, and black carp. Grass carp you've probably heard of or seen. You know, they've been stocked all around the country into golf course ponds and ponds to control vegetation. For the most part nowadays, they're required to be triploid, so sterile, but there are some populations out there that reproduce in our rivers. So we've also got black carp on there. Black carp are very similar in appearance to grass carp, but black carp are a molluscivore. So they feed on snails and mussels, and that's a pretty big concern for us here in Tennessee because we have some of the highest aquatic biodiversity really in the world. And you know, that includes not only the fish, but the freshwater mussel populations that we have. And a lot of those populations are threatened and endangered. So black carp are a concern. Thankfully, there have only been a couple of them found in Tennessee waters thus far. We're watching for them in the commercial fishery largely, and we'll keep an eye for any more of those coming in and keep a pulse on those. So then we've got silver carp and bighead carp. They're very similar. The bighead carp get larger than the silver carp, but the silver carp are probably the ones that most of you are familiar with or have heard of, the ones that'll jump up out of the water. And we've got these. I'll go into that a little bit more in a few minutes here, further down on the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. Both of those species are filter feeders. They feed really low down on the food chain on phytoplankton and zooplankton, and they can compete with our native fish for both food resources and space and habitat. So how did they get here? They were brought over largely for aquaculture purposes. You know, some of those things that you do with the best of intentions and it doesn't always work out quite how you had planned. And at one point or another, these things have either escaped or were released from their captivity, made it into the Tennessee and the Mississippi River, where they've then spread through portions of that Mississippi River and been able to spawn in certain areas. And they're making it into Tennessee by using our navigation locks at the dams. So here is a breakdown of where silver carp are. And I'm going to focus largely on silver carp because that's the species, again, that people are really most concerned about right now. Over on the left side of the map there, the state's western border, you've got the Mississippi River, and then kind of up into the north there's the Ohio River. And those are both, the populations are highly abundant, and those they're reproducing fairly consistently in those places. Make it into the Tennessee and Cumberland River there on Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley in orange. We still have what we're considering high populations there, but inconsistent recruitment. And so back in 2015, there was a really strong year class that entered the lake.
And some of those fish very well could have swum up through the lock at that point. It's possible that that was a recruitment event within our Tennessee and Cumberland River system. So, but we don't know that for sure. That year class really kicked us into some of the surveillance and monitoring efforts that we've got going on that I'll explain in just a minute here. Further up on the Tennessee River in pink there is Pickwick Reservoir. That's what we're considering the leading edge of the silver carp population in the Tennessee River. And then staying focused on the Tennessee, there's some red X's spread up through Alabama and up into Chickamauga, where we've had just isolated reports or individuals that have been documented. So extremely, extremely low numbers in those places, essentially almost undetectable, not completely undetectable, right, because we've had some reports, but really not what we consider viable populations in those locations. So what's TWA doing about invasive carp? Like I said, that 2015 year class really kicked off one of our big efforts, and that's the larval sampling work we do. Down on Kentucky and Barkley Lakes, we are out using larval fish trawls, larval light traps, mini fyke nets. We're doing electrified dozer trawls. We've got a bunch of annual sport fish work that goes on with electrofishing and trap nets. And then we also rely on the public. You know, if people encounter any small or juvenile carp, we've asked for the people to report those. Thankfully, we see no evidence for successful spawning in Kentucky or Barkley right now. And what I mean when I say that is a combination of these efforts that we have going on that I listed. There's been one individual larval silver carp identified by genetics, and then no juvenile silver carp collected in all of that electrofishing and mini fyke netting and stuff that we do. And we've also followed up with several reports that the public has submitted, which largely end up being, shad in places around docks and things. So really what that tells us is we've got a population that's driven by migration. So then some of our surveillance work is going on in this upper Tennessee area. We kicked that off in 2020 after that report of the fish in Chickamauga. And what we've been doing is electrofishing throughout summer months below 5 dams over here in East Tennessee: Nickajack, Chickamauga, Watts Bar, Fort Loudon, and Melton Hill. And so every other week, so about every 2 weeks, we go out and we'll shock up each bank of the river below the dam, and then shock it in front of the powerhouse, the lock, all of the spill gate there. And what we're essentially doing is just trying to find carp. So thankfully, we've had no silver carp detections in those places. And we feel this is the place where we need to be doing these things. At the dams, those fish that might be trying to move during those warmer months, that's where they're going to be stopped initially and potentially congregate. And so that's why we focus in those locations, and we use electrofishing. These fish, you've seen the pictures of them jumping. They react pretty violently, I would say, almost, to any sort of stimulus. So we would expect to see these fish react to the electricity being put in the water, and that's what we see in other places. So they're pretty easy to identify once they get to avoiding your electricity and jumping out of the water. So we're confident there that if we were shocking carp below any of these dams, we'd see them and identify them. Down in Kentucky and Barkley, where we've got those populations, we're monitoring those, looking at their distribution, their size and age structure, and then evaluating some of our sampling methods. So that picture I've got up there looks like a cross section. That's actually a spine or a fin ray from a silver carp, and it's pretty neat. You can you can age them just by counting it like rings on a tree. And we'll use information like that to see how fast these fish are growing in different reservoirs. We see a little bit slower growth, for example, down on Kentucky and Barkley than we do in places like Cheatham and Pickwick, because there are fewer fish in Cheatham and Pickwick and more resources available to those that are there. We also do telemetry work. So this is, we've got over 1,000 silver carp tagged swimming around in the Tennessee and Cumberland River. And there's these monitoring stations, essentially, receiver out in the water that can pick up the signal from these tags. And what we're really trying to do is hone in on, getting the best information we can about what time of year these fish move, what conditions cause that. Is there some temperature or flow or something that triggers them to move upstream? And then when they are moving, do we see them using the lock? Are they moving some other way? So that's given us some good information and helping us to evaluate any deterrents that are out there or places where we might get deterrents installed or hope to have deterrents installed. We've also prioritized deterrent locations through structured decision-making processes so that we work with our partners to, kind of have a list and be prepared. So if we get the opportunity to install a deterrent somewhere, we've got a good feeling for where that's going to go. And then final kind of active project that we have going is our Tennessee Carp Harvest Incentive Program, or T-CHIP. And that's a removal program. We work with wholesale fish dealers down on Kentucky and Barkley for the most part. There are a few other locations where they can fish for carp and be eligible for that, but the majority are on Kentucky and Barkley. And we incentivize basically the removal of these fish. So we're trying to fish them down as much as we can to alleviate any pressure that would cause these fish to try to move further upstream. We've got two primary tools at our disposal to try and prevent and control these things where they're at. Those are the deterrents and the removal. Deterrents are a really complex thing, a lot of partners involved. Any place where a deterrent might be installed in the Tennessee and Cumberland River is at a federal site. It's either Tennessee Valley Authority or Army Corps of Engineers that owns those. So, a lot of people think, why don't you guys get a deterrent in? Go put one in. And it's just not that simple. I really wish it was. But, we're working with a whole lot of partners. Funding is limited and is an issue, so it's important that we're strategic about it and we get these things in at the most effective places. And then there's lots of different types to consider as well. Also, the effectiveness of these things isn't 100%. So none of the types of deterrents available are 100% effective. But thankfully, they don't need to be. The important component here is that we get these things in place at multiple locations so that the effectiveness can compound. And then in between, we continue to do our removal. And that's, again, how we pull the numbers of these things down in between, sort of this block and tackle method, if you will. I see my time is running short, and I want to leave John a couple minutes if we can sneak him in. But we're trying to. I've seen an analogy. It's really like Kentucky Lake. It's like a bowl kind of filling up, and as that bowl fills up full of carp, it starts to spill over. These things aren't just charging upstream like salmon to get as far up as they can. And so just kind of a summary of what I've just gone over. These are an invasive species with potential for negative impacts, and it does absolutely warrant concern. But thankfully, we've seen no evidence of successful reproduction or spawning down on Kentucky and Barkley, where we've been monitoring for that. We've seen no significant upstream movements in recent years. They're not doing that salmon-like run to get up as far as they can, as fast as they can. We've got to get deterrents in place strategically, working with our partners, and keep after the removal. And that's it. Can we sneak John in for a couple minutes? 5 minutes. All right.
I just want to say first, thank you guys for having us here. It's nice to be able to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, on what we do and why we do it. Like was pointed out, our officers here are part of TWA, and Cole and I are fisheries biologists, and our job is to manage the fisheries and the reservoirs and streams and water bodies across the state. And also, we partner a lot with TVA. Clint Jones is here with TVA, and we're two different things. A lot of people confuse us. TVA is the ones that manage the waterways and the dam, so the dams. So I just want to kind of give you a very brief rundown on what we do. So if you see us out there with a shocking boat, we're putting electricity in the water that stuns the fish. We can collect them and measure them and find out a whole lot of things about the fishery. And you might see us out there running creel, which is probably some of you people that fish will have been interviewed by one of our creel clerks that may ask you about your fishing trip. So we use those types of information to set regulations and stocking recommendations and that sort of thing. So stocking is usually a big topic. Over the years, the amount of fish needed to keep up with the demand has outpaced our ability to produce those in the hatchery. So Tellico gets walleye and crappie, but not every year usually, and that goes back to the supply and demand thing from our hatcheries. We are every year expanding our hatcheries, but again, that has outpaced, the need has outpaced the ability for us to produce fish. So hopefully within a decade, we might be able to catch up with that. But one of the biggest threats besides invasive carp to our fisheries, at least sport fish and bass in particular, is the Alabama bass. You mentioned you guys have a biggest smallmouth bass category, and that will go away. So we have Alabama bass. You guys have Alabama bass in Tellico Lake, and how they take over a fishery is by hybridizing with the current fish population. So our native spotted bass and our native smallmouth bass grew up together, right? So they have what we call reproductive barriers. So they don't cross, they don't hybridize. They can, but they don't typically do that. So when you put an Alabama spotted bass, or Coosa spot, a lot of people call them, into that body of water, there are no reproductive barriers. So they will hybridize smallmouth out of existence. And because I work for the state and we have low bid equipment, my computer has been down this week, so I'm unable to show you that by graphs and pictures. But Tellico has a problem with Alabama bass right now. It's just beginning. And if the data from across the southeast holds true, which so far it has, then you've got about 15 years left of smallmouth bass in the lake. So if you don't want them anywhere else, the secret is not moving them. And it's no secret, that's the only way they can get to one water body to another water body is by people moving them. And that's how they've gotten here. So just to give you an example, Fontana Reservoir upstream, which is a TVA, also lake in the Little Tennessee watershed just upstream of here, you guys are probably familiar with that. They're almost out of pure smallmouth bass, and that situation is moving downstream. Watts Bar is about 50% of the smallmouth bass have Alabama bass genes. And Tellico is about, if I remember right, it's about 10% or so. I don't want to say that, don't take that to the bank, but it's coming is what I'm getting at. So I don't want to take up much more time. I would love to answer your questions about that, but please don't move fish around, especially bass. And if you guys research that, just Google Alabama bass, and it's everywhere. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. So to wrap it up, Dave is going to talk to us about health and welfare of the lake.
All right, thank you. Can you guys all hear me? I guess you can. I'm here representing the Watershed Association of the reservoir. We're a large volunteer organization, and what I'd like to do is just talk about the framework with which we work, and then some of the things that we're doing, some of the things we're concerned with in terms of water quality. We're talking about welfare of the lake, but actually the little red circle here shows where Tellico Reservoir shows up, where it fits within the TVA river system. And there are all sorts of reservoirs here. And TVA exists as a result of an act that was passed by Congress in 1933. So that was 90 years ago. And if you scroll back 90 years, 10% of the people who lived in Tennessee outside of the cities had electricity. The rest of them did not. They were going to the well and doing all sorts of, there was no refrigeration. It was a pretty rural area. The other point that I'd make is that about 2/3 of the Smoky Mountains by 1933 had been clear-cut. So there was no Smoky Mountain forest. It was basically a clear-cut area, and that meant that there was a lot of runoff, and there was very little retention of water, so there were terrible floods. So the TVA Act was put in place to address flood control, power generation, and also navigation. There were no real railroads. There was very difficult to do commerce and move products, so navigation became an important thing. That's why we have so many locks. So that's we live in the Tennessee, in the TVA River system, and it's important to understand this as background. Today, 90 years later, TVA would tell you that they have a number of different concerns. Navigation, flood control, and power are certainly major. There's also the question of water supply. We all in Tellico Village are drinking water from the TVA reservoir system. We're all concerned with recreation. That's a lot of what we're talking about here today. And water quality. TVA does have initiatives in place for water quality. It's not entirely their responsibility. Our organization, the Watershed Organization, is working together with TVA and with other constituents to address issues with respect to water quality. When it comes to water quality, we all need to understand that basically water quality is governed by the Clean Water Act from 1972. So now we're going back 50 years. Congress passed the Clean Water Act. There have, of course, been many changes to it, but that act was put in place. You can read the words, and in interest of time, I won't spend a lot of time on it. But Congress put in place the ability to regulate discharge into the waters, and they created the EPA to monitor and enforce. And if you look at the Tellico Reservoir, we have about 50, a little more than 50 permitted entities in the watershed who discharge into the reservoir. And they all self-report the quality of the water that they're discharging. I mean, everybody who's taking water out of the lake for drinking is discharging wastewater back in. So that's treated water, and so they need to look at that. And we, the water organization has some expert people who are monitoring the reporting that's done. It's all public information. And in general, everybody's a good actor. We did have a situation a few years ago with the Madisonville wastewater treatment plant, and we got involved with them, and they've made significant investments and have cleaned up their situation. But that is one of the things that our organization does. We are looking out on behalf of all of us as residents in the water on what's happening with point source pollution. Now, if you go to the Tennessee State, to the Department of Environment and Conservation, TDEC, you can go to this website that's shown here and see the state of the water bodies all around the reservoir, or all around the state. And you can see here that the Tellico Reservoir and many of its tributaries are all coded red. And the red means that they're impaired. So basically, if you look at our water organization, our job won't be finished until these waterways are shown in blue. You can see that there are some in blue, but not so many in this region. So what does that mean, and what do we have to do? There are some known causes for the impairment. The reason that the reservoir itself is red has only to do with contamination from PCBs. It was a contamination that happened even before the formation of the reservoir. There was illegal dumping of transformers up by the Chilhowie Dam. The transformers have been removed, but they weren't removed before the PCBs were discharged into the waterway. Today, PCBs are indetectable in the water. You can't see them, they'll never impact you. There is an advisory about consuming catfish, and that's been in place for many years. It was truly warranted when it was put in place. But we work with TVA, and we sample catfish on a regular basis, and we've seen substantial improvements. So we have some work to do with TDEC, and well, we may be asking your help as well to take a look at the current situation with respect to PCBs and that consumption advisory. The other area that our organization has spent a lot of time on, and we continue to, is on tributaries and what would be called non-point source contamination. And we're actively involved in that. We work with the county soil conservation districts, and the conservation districts are concerned with how the land is being used and helping property owners maximize the use and the productivity of the property. And I'm talking mostly about agriculture. And this might be one of our good friends. We've got quite a bit of cattle who are being raised, either dairy or cattle farming. And there is EPA funding that comes down through TDEC or through the Department of Agriculture in Tennessee through these soil conservation districts to implement agricultural best practices. And by that I mean to keep the cattle out of the creeks. That's really the problem that we have, is that the cattle go down and they water in the creeks. It's the easiest thing to do. I mean, and if we were all farming 90 years ago, that's what we would have done, is had the cattle go down to the creek and eat there, or drink water there. But if we can install cattle watering stations, restore the habitat around the creeks, then we can make the water cleaner. And there's been grant money up to over $1 million to date being awarded to property owners to make some of these changes. And we work with the soil conservation districts to make those improvements. And this is just, recently we were out with Monroe County, we were looking at Back Creek, and this can sort of show you, these photos are hard to see, but in the distance you can see that there are cattle. They have free access to this waterway, and you can see that the water is brown and the cattle have been in it, and so when they trample down over the bank of the stream, there is more erosion, and there's more mud, and of course if they defecate or urinate in the water, then that's contamination as well. So those are the things we're trying to prevent. We've done a substantial, this is a couple of years old, but we did a substantial sampling study on Back Creek. I just showed you some photographs. We've gone in all of these different districts. We've had sample sites represented by each of those alphanumeric designators. We have rank ordered them, and we're working with the Soil Conservation District with property owners on a priority basis based on that rank ordering. So that's kind of the work that we've been doing. If we weren't around, this wouldn't be happening. And I should point out that this can be done. In Middle Tennessee, Rutherford Creek, it took 16 years, but they implemented agricultural best practices, they implemented habitat restoration, and they turned it from red to blue. So that's what our goal is, and we'll keep working on that. The other thing I should talk to, though, is emerging threats. There's a lot of residential development and industrial development around the lake. You can see on the left, John Rogers, I think, is here. He helped take this picture in Maryville. This is what happens when still water gets warm and has nutrients, and algae blooms happen. And we have concern. This is a photo of the Tellico Reservoir. You might be able to see where it is, I don't know. But there is a concern that particularly if you're on a cove, that in 10 years when the water temperature increases another 5 or 10 degrees, that we may be having to deal with algae concerns, algae blooms on the reservoir. So we are working on this problem as well. We have a significant project going on with the Department of Microbiology at University of Tennessee. We are sampling the lake. We're doing 7 or 8 different locations around the lake every 3 or 4 weeks, and we're doing DNA testing of the algae that are collected. It's not we who are doing it, it's the scientists at UT, but we're helping them get out and do the testing. So, and we're sharing. We've recently created a scientific advisory council, so we're talking about the different things that we can be doing in the reservoir from a water quality point of view. I would point out that there is a Tennessee Smart Yards program that's also organized by the University of Tennessee. I would encourage homeowners to look at it. From a reservoir water quality point of view, we're most interested in water capture and runoff. To the extent we can limit runoff and absorb the water into the soil, that's good. Limiting lawn chemicals, perhaps we could have a biodiversity challenge rather than a green turf grass challenge for all of our lawns. Go plant a tree and plant native species and get some biodiversity, encourage pollinators, encourage the bird population. These are the things that Tennessee Smart Yards would ask you to do. And the little water droplet there shows Tellico in a secondary font compared to Cumberland and Mill counties. But Tellico actually has a lot of participants already, so we should all be encouraged. Have a look. So just to speak a little bit more about water, I'm representing them, but there are over 250 volunteers. We're a 20-year-old organization. We're nonprofit. We have members from throughout the watershed, not just Tellico Village, and we liaise. Our purpose and our goal is to liaise with constituents and with local and federal agencies. We have 3 major volunteer committees. Jim, thank you for mentioning the Lakeshore Cleanup. It's an annual event. We have a pyramid kind of a scheme, so if you're involved in a community service organization, chances are through them you have a chance to help with the Lakeshore Cleanup. We have our organization, I haven't talked about it, but we basically are responsible for having built the East Lakeshore Trail, 31-mile trail. We've got over 50 volunteers who are involved today in managing the maintenance of that trail and repairs and so forth. There's opportunity in that. And then the Water Quality Improvement Committee has 15 volunteers plus, and there are lots of opportunities in all 3 of the organizations to work with us. So how can I help with the watershed and with water quality? You can donate and join. You can see our website address down at the bottom. Improve your own green infrastructure. And we have plenty of volunteer opportunities. We have a boat, we have a pontoon boat that we use for going over the trail and also for doing water testing. And sometimes we just need somebody to captain the boat and be with the boat while the volunteers are going out. So if you're interested in being a boat captain on an occasional basis, let us know. Water testing, we are doing more and more water testing. We need more people to help us. So that's an area. We can envision that we may be doing volunteer work from a habitat restoration point of view. So that's in the future. We have trails opportunities, and we certainly have leadership opportunities for people who'd like to wrap their arms around a program and get going with that. And by the way, Bill Waldrop is here, sitting here, and he reminded me yesterday that we could also use somebody who lives on a cove who has 10 feet of water. We're installing temperature monitoring on different places around the lake. So if you are in a situation where you might want to volunteer for that, we can do that as well. So there are plenty of choices. And with that, I'll hand it back, and I think we're going to be taking questions very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we come to the part that you can ask questions. If anything's come up, there's a microphone in the center here, and any of our panelists would love to answer any questions about any of the data that you've heard tonight. John, I know you were cut short. Is there anything else that you would have liked to have said? And the microphones, the handheld mics, you can turn them on. I know we kind of didn't give you a lot.
Can y'all hear me? So I will echo your all's fishing club president and say, contrary to popular belief, there are fish in Tellico.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody coming. If something comes up, oh, Pat, yes. Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
So I'll keep it warm for you, okay? So thank all of you guys. I've watched your videos. I've watched your presentations. I've been hauled by T-Bart. I don't catch fish. But anyway, I wanted to add to water. I wanted to add to water. And this is, and again, thank you. I'm not saying, I want to make sure that the newer people in Tellico Village understand what's going on in Tellico Village in relation to what water's doing. Primarily with your the home runoff and all this. So I wanted to bring you some information that we can all watch on video if you have to. So we do have golf courses in Tellico Village, and they directly affect the Tellico Village Reservoir highly. There are 19 Audubon certified international golf courses in Tennessee, only 19 of all the hundreds that we have. There are 9 in East Tennessee, and there are 3 in the Knoxville area, and they are Tanasi, Tokwa, and Kahiti. This started by and I don't know if there's a water affiliation, but I'm kind of thinking it was. We had a golf advisory member back in 2017 come to the Golf Advisory Committee and say we need to be Audubon certified. So they worked on it 2017, 18, and 19. They were certified in 2019 and been certified for the last 5 years. This is a very detailed process involving environmental planning, chemical use reduction and safety, wildlife and habitat management, water conservation, as you were talking about. What goes on comes off, or either it gets absorbed. And then it's water quality management. So as an example, being a golfer, I love to play golf, but we have grown, and you will see, if you're a golfer, these areas that are natural that we've installed over the last 5 years. And if you get in them, it's going to take you 6 strokes to get out. And if you take a drop, it's even worse. So all of this has to do with maintaining the water quality on and off the course, the fertilizer use, the herbicide use, and giving a habitat to the natural environment of the animals and the insects. And it goes even further. If you've been reading your telegram, you notice that the golf beautification committees particularly in Kahidi, are actively installing butterfly gardens, which is natural habitat and very pretty. And I just wanted to add to what you guys at Water are doing. Tremendous job. The golf courses are doing it. And as you challenged us, every homeowner doing this adds acres and acres to this same runoff that will eventually go into the water. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is aimed for the fisheries people. We have some great big carp under our dock. I mean, they are huge. And I wonder, do the carp compete with each other? Would those perhaps use the same resources out of the water or compete with the silver carp, which we're trying to prevent?
So the carp that you're most likely seeing are probably a couple of different species. It could be grass carp. You could be seeing common carp if they've got an orange color to them. Some other species that typically hang out kind of uptight like that under docks and things are like your buffalo species, your smallmouth buffalo and bigmouth buffalo. So those particular species, the common carp, more of a bottom feeder. They're not going to be filtering the water in that same way that a silver carp would be. Any fish out there could be competing for some space with another fish or some habitat, and those common carp can be destructive in how they root around in the bottom and uproot any vegetation and stuff like that, but not in the same way that a silver carp would be a competitor.
Some of those are really big, too.
Hi, I'm Stan Seck, and I had a question about the Asian carp. I wonder if you could review the funding we have to stop the Asian carp, the status of the funding, and how much funding do we need to build the barriers?
Absolutely. So I'm going to start and say there's kind of two different avenues for funding that we work from. A lot of the projects and stuff that I presented to you today, the work that we're out there actively doing, that comes from funding appropriated by Congress to the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service uses some of that money, and then they make a portion of it available for us as the state agency to apply for grants. That in this past year, that was at $31 million in total for that amount. So the Fish and Wildlife Service then takes their portion of that, and then ultimately when it all trickles down, right, that's for the Mississippi River Basin states. So by the time we put in for that grant and make a request for TWRA, this past year was a roughly $2.5 million request. And of that $2.5 million, $1.5 million was sort of essentially earmarked, right, for our T-chip, our incentive removal program. So that's some of the active projects that we have going on. There's another avenue of funding that's for deterrence. That came through in legislation called WRDA 2020. And there's not to get too deep into it here, but there's Section 509, it's called. And that is where Congress essentially charged the Army Corps of Engineers with implementing a deterrent pilot program in the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. Now, as part of that legislation, there was $25 million authorized that has not yet been appropriated. So Congress has to, and Mike could dig into this a little bit more, he's more familiar, but I heard him say the other day, right, at the state level, a lot of the times things come down not as an authorization and an appropriation together. Well, at the federal level, right, they do those separately. So something that's authorized doesn't necessarily have the funding until it's appropriated. So that $25 million, there's been some initial small appropriations that have gone to the Army Corps of Engineers for them to start their planning process for this project. Now, I'm just going to spitball a few numbers here. Don't take these hard and fast, right? Everything changes with the time. But an example to go on right now is the BAF, bioacoustic fish fence, down at Barkley Lock. That project has run $7 to $10 million. And so you're thinking $25 million. By the time we add some match funding that is required to use that, you're probably looking at 2-3 deterrents that we could put in place, maybe a fourth, and it's like I said, it's going to be very dependent on any specific location, right? So some locations that we would want to put a deterrent in, they might have 2 locks. They might have a main lock and an auxiliary lock, and it could be important to get deterrents in both of those spots, which could raise the cost. Some of the locks that are in consideration may be smaller and not require so much funding. And so that's kind of the simple answer when you consider the BAF technology that we're looking at. If you were to consider other technologies, the price could go up or down just depending on what that deterrent type was. When do we expect to put in the first deterrent? That's a very loaded question, and I would say, I would go back to say, right, we are in this with a lot of partners. TWA can't go out and put in a barrier, but we are working with those partners, TVA, the Army Corps. Right now, given that TVA has initiated some of their planning, I would expect that to still be happening for the next 6 to 8 months, and then beyond that, there's a permitting and design stage that has to happen. So I am hopeful that with some of the momentum that we have here, that in 1.5 to 2 years, we could be seeing action, like actual deterrent going in. Actual construction. That's my speculating and being hopeful. So I can't tell you any firm date or anything like that. It's too convoluted.
And let me just add one thing, something he did touch on. It's dependent on federal funding. As he said, the money's been authorized but not appropriated. At the state level, and Representative Russell could tell you, we do that all in one bill at the state level. At the federal level, they do it in 2 different steps. So we're still waiting on them to appropriate the money. Just because they authorize it doesn't mean it's there for the Corps and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to access. And so we're still waiting on that as well.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if you think of something, you've got my email address.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead,
For
Dave.
Jeff. If I had a child's life preserver to donate, how would I go about doing that?
You would take it to my car after the meeting.
Well, I was asking on behalf of the audience.
No, if you've got, we joke about those kiosks because oftentimes people do donate life jackets. So if you've got some you'd like to donate, we would love to have them. They've got to be valid, good shape, clean, something you would put on your family. They've got to be in good shape. But if you've got those and you're looking to get rid of them, we'd love to have them.
Yeah, you sure can.
So going back to the Asian carp, there's a lot of controversy about why we're putting the barriers perhaps behind the carp instead of in the front of the carp. For example, Watts Bar Lake, Tellico Lake, and the lakes upstream, which have not been invaded, and yet the apparent thought is to put it in Barkley or Kentucky Lake. Can you speak to that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I kind of laid out, right, the majority of the population, and with what we're seeing in our larval work, our sampling, and our surveillance work, the leading edge of that population in the Tennessee River is in Pickwick Reservoir. So right now, our current strategy would prioritize Wilson Lock, which is ahead of, upstream end of Pickwick Reservoir. And that, to get ahead of that population there. But our main source of carp is still the Ohio River. When we have a population that's migratory, it's being driven by those fish that are swimming in and locking through, we still have an opportunity to shut off a lot of those fish coming in from that source, get ahead of them at Wilson, and then fish them down in between, like we're doing with our T-chip program. And that's really the basis for the strategy that we have. And right, there are other locations where we'd like to get deterrence into. A second priority being a Pickwick for us. And right, then you'd have 3 deterrents in a row there, all working in combination, compounding and slowing down the number of fish that are moving. And then beyond that, Gunnersville, just to get further up. And let me say this too, right? A lot of this is also based on that limited funding available. We want to put this on the ground in the most effective way possible to prevent, slow, and control those fish from moving. And that's really where we would want to go to have the most impact we could for all of those waters throughout Alabama into Tennessee. You've got Wilson, Wheeler, Gunnersville, Nickajack, Chickamauga, all the way up to Watts Bar. So there's a lot of water that we can impact by going lower, and assuming that we continue to see that lack of reproduction, and that this population is migration driven. And I guess I would just add, if we see things change where we get more consistent reproduction, that's something that we'll take back. And as the group of partners, we're working with USGS and the Corps and Fish and Wildlife Service, TVA, and all the surrounding states. If we see conditions change in any of those places, we're going to take them back to the group and say, hey, this is something different, and this isn't what we've been experiencing to this point. Do we need to adjust our plan? The document, the programmatic environmental assessment, you may have seen or heard of that TVA did. There's flexibility and there's room within that to incorporate new and learned information. So,
I had a question. So we heard earlier the Ohio River is inundated with them. What are they doing up there?
So each of these systems is a little bit different. So the Ohio River, that main stem there, there are a series of dams up the Ohio River. So there's further up where there are still carp populations, but they're lower. They're also doing surveillance above that. They're doing some removal efforts in through there, but a lot of the effort surrounding the Ohio River really is in the tributaries. So the Wabash River, the Illinois River, places like that, there's a lot of removal efforts going on.
Okay.
And then, I would say also that there's the Great Lakes are certainly a concern. The Chicago area waterway, Brandon Road, places like that. They're putting a ton of money and effort into both removal and deterrence to try and prevent the fish from getting into the Great Lakes. And that opens up a whole nother can of worms where that funding comes from, because it's a different source. It's Great Lakes Restoration Initiative money.
Yes.
How are these barriers going to affect other migratory species that now migrate?
Great question. So right now, the barriers that, or the deterrents that are in place are in an experimental phase. right? So we're tagging a lot of fish around all of those experiments, basically. And it's not just carp that we're tagging. We're tagging a lot of carp to see, how they react to the bath is a bubble curtain with sound and lights, right? So we want to see how the carp might go up to it and approach it and turn around, or how they pass it when they do. At the same time, we're putting tags in fish like lake sturgeon and paddlefish and drum, a lot of our native species, and they're measuring the same sort of things there. Are they approaching that deterrent and turning around, or are they going right through it and passing like they might need to or want to? And by and large, what's been seen with some of this preliminary information is that our native fish have a much better time crossing that deterrent. And we know that they're not as sensitive to stimuli as silver carp are, right? So, and that's one of the things, these carp jump up out of the water when they're abundant and a boat drives by. They're reacting to that boat motor stimuli and things like that. So our native fish aren't as sensitive to those types of things.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, I think that wraps up our program. You've got my email. If things come to you, you get home and start thinking about something else, please send me an email, and we'll get the answers for you. And thank you to all our speakers for coming out.